Welcome everyone to today's webcast on the KTER Center's efforts to improve vocational rehabilitation services for transition-aged youth with disabilities, which will be presented by Jeremy Rasmussen. I'm Ann Outlaw from the American Institutes for Research, and I'll be your host for the webcast. This webcast is part of a four-part series of webcasts on the KTER Center's research activities and resources. The webcast is offered through the Center on Knowledge Translation for Employment Research, or the KTER Center, which is funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDLR. We have information that accompanies today's webcast on our website. This includes a PowerPoint file and a text description of the training materials, as well as links to the other webcasts in the series. Before we dive into today's webcast, I'd like to give a brief overview of the KTER Center's purpose and activities. On the slide, you can see our purpose. The KTER Center is here to test knowledge translation strategies to help stakeholders and others find, use, and understand research to ultimately help people with disabilities find and keep their jobs. We do this by identifying findings related to improving employment outcomes among individuals with disabilities. We also work to determine what needs for research-based information are the most pressing for stakeholders, such as individuals with disabilities and their families, vocational rehabilitation counselors or VR counselors, the business community, as well as policymakers. Finally, we investigate and test knowledge translation strategies that can increase these stakeholders' appropriate use of identified research findings that meet their reported needs. You can hear more about these activities in the webcast in this series or by visiting our website at kter.org. Now let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce to the audience Jeremy Rasmussen. Jeremy is from the American Institutes for Research, and he works on the KTER Center. He's here today to discuss the results from focus groups that were held with VR counselors and transition-aged youth with disabilities. Jeremy will talk about the findings and how they will be useful to the field. Thank you so much for joining us, Jeremy.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So to get us going, can you tell us a little about why you did the focus groups?
Yes, the purpose of this research really begins with this idea of bridging the gap between research and practice in a way that enables VR counselors and their supervisors to use research and evidence-based practices to help transition-age youth find jobs and keep them. To do that, we not only need to know what VR staff in the field are doing in terms of best practice, but to learn what challenges youth with disabilities face and what they need in terms of support. These focus groups really gave us the opportunity to do just that.
And so what are some of the challenges that transition-aged youth encounter while seeking employment?
To qualify that question a bit, the types and number of challenges can really vary. Factors such as cultural background, economic status, and type of disability need to be considered by VR staff. One of the first steps is to make sure that youth with disabilities are aware of the employment opportunities out there, as well as the kinds of workplace accommodations that they can use to help them succeed.
And to back up, can you remind everyone why it's important to focus on employment for transition-aged youth with disabilities?
Studies have shown that people with disabilities face disproportionate challenges in terms of employment rates, wages, advancement, workplace barriers, accommodations and supports. In addition to this, studies have also shown that VR counselors can play a significant role in helping these youth find employment. In order to close this employment gap, it is important to identify best practices from the field, as well as challenges faced by transition-aged youth.
Okay, so let's dig into the focus group and the results that you found. First, whom did you involve in the focus groups?
Well, between October and December 2016, we conducted 3 telephone-based focus groups. 2 of those focus groups were conducted with a total of 14 VR counselors. The third focus group was held for young adults 18 to 24 years of age with a wide range of disabilities who've all had previous experience with VR services. In terms of geography, 9 states were represented across all 3 focus groups.
what did you discuss during the focus groups?
With VR staff, we discussed what they consider to be most important in terms of what they do and need to do to help youth with disabilities successfully find jobs and keep them. The focus group with youth in transition discussed what VR counselors could do to support them in finding and keeping a job. The youth focus group also talked about their challenges, accommodations they need to be successful at work, and how to find a job.
And what were some of the perspectives that the VR counselors shared?
If you don't mind, I'm going to replace the word perspectives here with themes. And from our discussions with VR counselors, 3 themes emerged. The first theme was the need to provide a multifaceted approach to family support. Counselors noted that regularly scheduled meetings were the foundation that created strong relationships with both the youth and their families. They also noted that it can be helpful to encourage family members to be realistic about their aspirations for their child, especially in regards to employment or college. And counselors sometimes have to mediate between the youth or young adult and his or her family to reconcile competing expectations. The second theme was the need to conduct many activities with clients to address long-term support needs. For example, VR counselors identified things like conducting job assessments, training on social skills, identifying the supports needed for an individual to work, and things of that nature. VR counselors seem to especially value resources that built their capacity to teach youth how to engage in long-term thinking and planning. Now, the third and final theme that emerged was strategies on empowerment and disability disclosure. VR counselors stressed the importance of preparing youth for employment opportunities by having the youth practice how to request the kinds of accommodations that they would need in the job. There was also discussion about the need for a person with a disability to find the right or appropriate time to disclose that disability to an employer.
I'm guessing that there are quite a few elements and approaches that go into making those 3 themes work successfully in practice.
Yes, absolutely. I think what you're picking up on here is just how nuanced this work is, the work of VR counselors. Though these themes are a great place to build specific strategies around, what those strategies end up being will likely depend largely on the individual needs of the youth with a disability.
So speaking of the youth with disabilities, what themes emerge from their participation in the focus groups?
Well, 3 themes also emerged from our discussions with the transition-aged youth. Interestingly enough, the importance of understanding their needs is the first theme. Youth participants stated that VR counselors are often helpful in describing how high school differed from work and college, but that not all of them understood needs specific to their age or to having a specific disability. The second theme highlighted the different experiences and preferences that youth have for working with the VR counselors. For example, some stated how it was helpful when VR counselors supported them on the job for the first 3 months. Other participants emphasized how much they value the guidance VR counselors provide in navigating workplace accommodations. The third theme here centered on independence and self-reliance. Youth participants expressed that they can be relatively self-reliant in finding jobs. Ironically, one reason they reported for being more independent is the issue of high VR staff turnover. This turnover meant that youth had to be more independent in searching for employment opportunities.
So it seems like being responsive to the needs of youth with disabilities while respecting their independence are 2 big takeaways. Is there a balance between the 2?
I would say yes, absolutely. I think the second theme really gets at that point. Youth with disabilities vary in the level of long-term job support they want. There's a balance, and that balance will need to be determined on a case-by-case basis.
Do you see a difference between what the VR counselors are describing as best practices and what the youth with disabilities are describing as challenges and needs for support?
No, not really. Good practices involving family engagement, long-term support needs, and disclosure strategies not only can alleviate many of the challenges experienced by these youth, but also make them more independent.
So while the number of people who participated in the focus groups was small, Both groups arrived at great recommendations. So do you think that this is reflective of the VR counselors and transition-aged youth in general?
For VR counselors, I would say no. These focus groups were small, and VR counselors volunteered, so they were self-selected. Don't represent all VR counselors. However, the themes that emerge give us a sense of what kinds of practices may be successful in helping youth with disabilities find and keep jobs. The fact that those themes align with what we learned from the youth focus group is really helpful to think about when planning services. On the other hand, although the youth with disabilities who participated were also self-selected, being more responsive to the needs of these youth while respecting their independence is important when providing services in general.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for taking time out to talk to us about this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
And for our audience, you can find more information about the work at the KTER Center's website at www.kter.org. As a reminder, today's webcast is part of a series of webcasts on the KTER Center's activities, and don't forget to view the other webcasts in the series. After you finish watching all of them, please remember to fill out an evaluation, and we'll send this evaluation link to all of you who registered. I'd also like to thank the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, or NIDLR, for providing funding for this webcast. On this final note, I'd like to conclude the webcast, and we look forward to your participation in our next event. So thank you.